What if Kate Bush signed with CRASS Records? That's the unlikely scenario we're going to be taking a look at on this week's What If, How, When, Why. Hello, my name is Morgan Brown, and every Monday I upload a new What If video to my YouTube channel. The idea of these videos is that each week I take a different popular song and try to imagine an alternative universe in which some change of circumstances causes that song to come out completely different from the version that we know and love, and then take the original lead vocal of that song and record my own backing track to it using just GarageBand and whatever instruments I have around the house in order to bring this alternative version to life. So the song that I picked this week was Breathing by Kate Bush, and I tried to convert that into a CRASS Records style anarcho-punk song. So if you haven't had a chance to listen to that yet, here's a little taster. Obviously, Kate Bush is a really fascinating and completely unique performer and writer. One of very few popular musicians that I can think of where you can't quite place her in any sort of established lineage of pop performers. It's kind of hard to see exactly where she comes from, if you know what I mean. You can definitely hear some influences. I think there's probably a fair bit of early Genesis in there. Pink Floyd, certainly. I always think some folk music. I feel like I can hear some Sandy Denny in there. Like the first Sandy Denny album, that certainly has a bit of a proto-Kate Bush feel to it. Joni Mitchell, I think, as well, probably is in there somewhere. But the way that she's taken those and all manner of other influences and combined them is really unique, and there's just no one else who sounds quite like her. She had a really unusual career path too. I mean, she was signed to EMI Records at a really young age, I think following a tip from Dave Gilmour from Pink Floyd, and sort of kept on retainer for a couple of years, I believe, while she was just demoing and writing songs and still at school as well. So by the time she came around to making her first album, she'd got some mad number of songs completely written and demoed, like 50 songs all ready to go. And yeah, when she eventually sort of landed in the public eye with this hitherto unknown combination of prog rock, pop, elements of folk, elements of glam, and performance art, all with a pretty unique image and this unique, quite shrill soprano singing voice, just totally unlike anything else that anyone had heard before, really. And she's just continued to absolutely tread her own path, irrespective of any commercial forces, any trends. And there aren't many people who've managed to do that, but I find it really, in a way, quite comforting that she has managed to maintain this career of being uncompromisingly odd for so long, and during the course of that has become this, not just a household name, but a kind of national institution as well. There's something quite wonderful about that. And despite not really playing live since whatever it was, 1979, despite having a work rate that doesn't keep her in the public eye year after year, she's still maintained this kind of legendary status, and that's pretty great, I think. As I say, I feel like Kate Bush's music mainly springs from a kind of prog rock / art glam kind of place, and she emerged into the kind of mainstream music scene at a time when those kind of styles of music were pretty much under attack from punk. But I don't know, to me it's never seemed like she was really at odds with punk. She doesn't feel like some kind of dinosaur music that needs to be finished off, although, you know, certainly you could argue that some of her stuff's overindulgent. It's not like Emerson, Lake and Palmer or something. There's a sort of avant-garde edginess to it that I think makes it a little bit more compatible with punk than some of the stuff that she was influenced by. And certainly once you get to some of the artier reaches of kind of post-punk, towards the end of the 70s and into the 80s. I feel like there were probably some of those people who were already taking some influence from Kate Bush. And I guess one person who came out of that scene who you could particularly point to as being obviously Kate Bush influenced would be Björk, who totally came out of punk rock and whose first band, Kukl, were signed to CRASS Records. So there is a little bit of a link there somehow, if you'll follow me with this. But yeah, I guess hearing CRASS for the first time in 1978 or whenever, you maybe wouldn't put those two together. If you're not familiar with CRASS, they're a really fascinating band, and I would definitely urge you to check them out. It's strange, really, because although I think their legacy is absolutely massive and they've been hugely influential, they're not one of the bands from that era that you hear quite as often. I think part of the reason is just that their music is really uncompromising, and while a lot of the rest of punk rock, although it was probably shocking at the time, now kind of feels quite cozy and quite familiar, and elements of it have become mainstream, I think even to this day, most CRASS records still sound really sort of abrasive and difficult and dangerous. And although people have definitely assimilated little bits of what they were doing, there's no one who's ever made a chart hit sounding like CRASS. I think formed in about 1977. Penny Rambo, I guess, is the drummer, but I guess was sort of the de facto leader. It come out of the political end of the 60s hippie scene, so a little bit older than a lot of other punks, but a strong background in fairly hardcore radical politics, which definitely informed everything that CRASS did. And he was kind of the leader figure of the Dial House commune. Obviously, it's an anarchist commune, so no one's the leader, but ran this commune based on the anarchist principles that he'd picked up in that hippie movement. And from this commune emerges this band that takes punk rock and applies actual anarchist principles to it, rather than Malcolm McLaren's idea of just throwing around the word anarchy. So they quickly became really notorious, partly for this uncompromising message, but then the music was just as uncompromising. It's a really unusual sound, driven by Penny Rambo's kind of fairly militaristic it's almost a marching band snare thing that he does, driving propulsive drumming style. And then normally these really sharp, aggressive, fizzy guitars, multiple lead vocalists. There's Steve Ignorant, who's got this proper working class snarl to him, and then Yves Libertine and Joy de Vivre, who bring in different voices and different perspectives as well. And they had a really quirky songwriting approach as well. Although some of the stuff sounds fairly straight ahead punk, they were not afraid of just taking risks, taking weird diversions, moments that veer into things that sound almost like dub, bits that sort of foreshadow some of the stuff that happens in post-punk and goth. There are elements of disco in there occasionally, all in support of this furious yet really witty and really intelligent political message that they were carrying. So really powerful stuff. And in addition to their own records, after Small Wonder Records let them down on their first album by refusing to press the track Reality Asylum, they founded their own label as well, CRASS Records. And through that just brought so much more wild and exciting music to the world that might have otherwise fallen under the radar. They didn't necessarily have a signature sound, but what linked all the bands together was their radicalism and generally quite a non-conformist approach to music as well. So you get things like D&V, who were a drum and vocal duo, and you get Rudimentary Peni, who just produced this terrifying sort of nightmarish death punk take on anarcho. You get the Cravats, who have this angular, jarring kind of art punk feel to them. The Mob, who produced this very gloomy, proto-gothic kind of stuff. And even occasional things like MDC, the American hardcore band, who had this fairly radical kind of anarchist thrash punk as well. So quite all over the map, but all really exciting, really radical stuff. And yeah, as I say, other stuff from the era might be better known, might have made more of a mainstream footprint, but I think an awful lot of the sort of underground and alternative music landscape of the next several decades owes a tremendous amount to CRASS Records, as does the grassroots anarchist movement itself in the UK. I think in the years since the peak of the hippie movement, it had probably been dwindling, but CRASS and Dial House and CRASS Records and the movement that they spawned kind of really brought that right back front and centre, to the point that things that CRASS were doing were being discussed in Parliament. That was the kind of cultural impact that they had. So my thought for this week's alternative universe scenario was, in this alternative 1979, Kate Bush is working on this third album. The first two have obviously been released by EMI, and while they've been supportive of her, she's not been too happy with some of the production choices they've made and some of the promotional choices they've made. So she's determined to kind of take control this time. And one evening, after a long day in the studio, she puts on the radio, tunes to the John Peel show, and CRASS happened to be in session on the Peel show, so she's completely flabbergasted by this band. It's different to any punk she's heard before. It's much more urgent, but also a bit more quirky, a bit more artsy, and she's drawn to the strong political message which is conveyed with intelligence and wit. And she thinks, oh, who are these people? I need to find out more about them. So does some reading up, eventually finds out about the Dial House commune and goes to visit them there and chats with the members of the commune, is really inspired by that. While she's there, she thinks, well, I've just written this new song, which feels like it's in the spirit of some of the things we've been talking about here. So she plays them breathing, and, you know, they love the sentiment of the song, and some of the members of CRASS start to jam with her, and in the process of this, turn it from this beautiful, haunting ballad into this much more urgent anarcho-punk style track. And she's really taken with that, so goes back to the studio the next day and starts re-recording Breathing as this raging kind of anarcho-punk song. EMI executives get word of this and come and see her and absolutely refuse to allow her to release this. So in protest, she tears up her EMI contract and leaves that major label to go and sign to CRASS Records, and as a result becomes this leading anarcho-punk figure, inspiring a whole new generation of activists. So in attempting to convert Breathing into an anarcho-punk song, as ever, my first step is always to just take the isolated vocal, pop it into GarageBand, and just get it matched up with the grid in there. This is really tricky with Breathing because it's got an unusual shifting time signature, and it also fluctuates in tempo quite a lot. There's a natural kind of ebb and flow to the timing, which works perfectly on the original record, but definitely doesn't work for what I was trying to do. So I had to do a lot of shuffling about, moving waveforms about to just kind of get everything into time. I then sped it up considerably because we need that sense of punk rock urgency to it as well. Popped some drums on. I was trying to go for a bit of that Penny Rambo style, so he does a thing where he tends to use a lot of snare rolls which sound a little bit like military band drumming, so I tried to get a bit of that in the verses and then a more straightforward punk beat in the choruses just to give it a bit more forward drive. I then popped some bass on. I tried to give that a really full tone because one of the things you get on CRASS Records is normally the guitars are extremely trebly, don't have too much body to them, and the bass fills out most of the sound. So I gave it a pretty big full tone and a little bit of flanger just to give it a bit of that kind of post-punk sort of feel as well, which I quite liked. And guitar-wise, I've got two guitars on there, pan, hard left and right, both of which have really quite abrasive fuzz tones on them. I took out all the bass and lower mids from their sounds, so they're really kind of abrasive. Popped a bit of chorus on there too to just kind of thicken up what sound there was. So they're kind of scratching away there, and then as we get into the outro, I added another couple of guitar tracks, not playing any kind of harmonic stuff, but just making various feedback and horrible noises, which just builds up as the remainder of the track goes on, just to create a sense of growing chaos and panic. The outro of the song has Roy Harper turning up on vocals. He does two harmony vocal lines that repeat round over that outro of the song, which is great, but Roy Harper doesn't sound tremendously punk on his own, so I added a few extra vocals on there just to kind of make it sound a little bit more like a kind of punk gang vocal as well. And then just to give that outro even more of a sense of building urgency, I added some sound effects. So I've got, it's a recording of a riot somewhere that fades in gradually over the outro. So there's shouting crowds and things breaking, and I think a police helicopter and some sirens that just builds up as the outro goes on. And then as the final chord hits, we've got an explosion as well, which it's a bit on the nose for a song about the aftermath of nuclear war, but I figure there's not that much room for subtlety in these things. We're trying to get across an urgency urgent message, so singing about a nuclear bomb, you can end things with an explosion, was my reasoning there. And then for the video, it was always going to be tricky with Kate Bush to find good performance footage because she really didn't tour after 1979 and has just done kind of scattered one-off appearances. Luckily, there's one performance of Breathing from a charity concert in about 1986, I think. So I used that as a basis and then interspersed it with some footage of, I think I borrowed some footage of the Subhumans to use as a backing band because great band anyway, and that they have that 80s anarcho look that I was looking for. So I borrowed them to be the backing group. Got some little bits of archive footage of nuclear tests that just kind of fades in the background occasionally to just reinforce the song's theme. And then as well, I've got my usual mocked up concert posters and flyers, so just placing Kate Bush there in an anarcho-punk context, just cropping up on bills in the early 80s. So hopefully that makes it feel a bit more of the time as well. So I hope you enjoyed it. I have a feeling I'll probably upset a lot of Kate Bush fans with this, and I'm really sorry because I'm a Kate Bush fan myself, but I just thought the song's subject matter aligned pretty well with anarcho-punk and just wanted to see if I could combine the two. But please let me know what you thought down in the comments. Also, if you did enjoy it, please like and subscribe. That always really helps. And if there's anything you'd like me to do in coming weeks, any styles you'd like me to take on, any songs you'd like me to try my hand at, or any artists you'd like me to take a look at, please do let me know. I always appreciate your suggestions and we'll try and get around to them eventually. But otherwise, that's it from me for this week. So thanks very much indeed for watching, and I will see you next time.